Let's move on now, and we are having our next speaker is who's the next in line? Yes, it's Enrique. Enrique comes to us from the Portuguese Ministry of Finance, where he's in the Cabinet for Strategic Policy and Planning and International Affairs. Enrique, you're also a researcher on complexity and economics. And you've been involved in the board of directors of the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and you've been head of the Department of Multilateral Affairs at the Portuguese Foreign Ministry. So I think that's a very highly qualified basis on which to give us your story this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Like Richard, I must apologize at the very beginning because I got a call on the plane here. I hope I can make myself clear. As Richard said, until July last year, I was at the board of directors of the IDEV, Asian Development Bank, headquartered in Manila, which is the biggest competitor of this new bank that China is setting. And since then, for the last 9 months, I've been involved in the negotiations for Portugal of this setting of this new bank. So we thought that this movement by China is a turning point in the global financial architecture, so we draw a few lessons from that we would like to share with you today. The presentation is not okay. So following on the topic of the conference, what, why, how, where, and how much about China, so we structured our presentation very, very simply, asking the questions how things were before, what somebody said would happen, what happened, why happened, how much things are changing, and the last one, what we will find next. So I think it will be easy to follow. So this is the global picture of global financial architecture before the Chinese new bank. So there are 6 big multilateral and regional banks. As you can see, in all of them, the US and in some of them, Japan, lead the way in terms of capital, voting power, and concessional windows, except one that it's highlighted in red. At the end, you will understand why, which is CAF. It's 90% of the shareholders are 5 Andean countries: Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. So China multilaterally has been trying to gain weight in the global financial architecture. They become shareholders of the World Bank in 1980, of the African Development Bank in 1985, Asian Development Bank in 1986, and Inter-American Development Bank in 2009. They are putting a lot of effort on the voice reform of the World Bank. As Kitano-san said, they have put a lot of money in trust funds because they had no access to new shares in these banks. So trying to gain influence in these banks, they have put $1 billion in the Inter-American Development Bank, $2 billion in the African Development Bank, and other initiatives that my colleague mentioned already. So what somebody said would happen. In January this year, these 2 authors presented a paper published in January, as I said, where they set the framework for a new global financial statecraft to become hegemonic. So they move usually from defensive to offensive in terms of columns, and from bilateral to systemic in terms of roles. At the end of the day, interestingly enough, the last step that this paper projects, is that this statecraft will construct institutions of governance, giving them hegemonic or disproportionate power. And that happened. I will not talk about the BRICS Bank because personally I think it's a dead end. But in this case, China set this bank, announced this bank 18 months ago by the Prime Minister. At the beginning, only regional members wanted to join, 26, and on 12 March 2015, everything changed. Because in terms of game theory, there was a problem. China needed non-regional members to become shareholders of this bank in terms of reputation and credibility of how good they are in leading a global financial institution. but nobody wanted to join until that day. UK announced publicly that they are going to join, and since that day, in the 2 weeks and a half after, another 25 non-regional members joined. Of course, you know that the US didn't, and Japan didn't. So far, all the other usual suspects, they did, despite of the pressures of the US government, as you might expect, and as the media said. So this is, right now there are 53, they are not members yet because the bank has not been set, but they call themselves prospective founding members of this bank, and they are negotiating the charter of this bank, which will be signed by the end of June. So as you can see, you have countries, almost all in Asia, except Japan and North Korea. Even Taiwan has applied for that membership if they call themselves, if they agree in calling themselves Chinese Taipei. You have the usual suspects in Europe, Brazil and Russia, Egypt and some Middle East countries. There's a big difference in this bank with Asian Development Bank, which is Asian Development Bank, ADB, operates in Asia and Pacific. This bank will operate in Asia, Pacific and Middle East, financing projects. So all these countries, non-regional countries that announced the willingness to join the bank, of course they set, it's not a blank check. I mean, they set some principles in terms of governance that the institution needs to respect if they want these countries to become shareholders. And it's working so far in the sense that Chinese agreed to forgo one of the principles that was in the draft charter, which was veto power in this new bank. So bottom line, sometimes it's better to be inside the negotiations than outside, because you can make things happen if you're from inside. So in terms of, in this case, a European or non-regional member thinking about becoming a member, a shareholder of this bank or not, there are several questions they need to make to themselves. So we ran a SWOT analysis, pretty simple, with the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And of course, in terms of strengths of this bank, it will have a strong capital base, $100 billion, which is more than the ADB had before the last capital increase because of the financial crisis. Strengthens the relationship with China, which is obviously a big player in the world. And for the European countries, it's a technicality, but contributions of capital to banks doesn't count for the excessive deficit procedure, which limits our public finances. Weaknesses, that was the problem. Becoming a founding member of a bank with no record, with no background, and in terms of threats, also becoming the first one to join, which is not regional. When you are the first, you can gain a lot from China, but you can lose a lot from the traditional allies. Of course, membership in this bank could be interpreted as well as a lack of commitment or satisfaction with ADB, the current big player multilateral in the region. And sometimes you can find yourself, instead of joining a PRC-led institution, instead of that, you can find yourself in an institution which could be PRC controlled, which is too much. But there are also opportunities, of course. The deadline of 31st March for countries to join only meant that those countries are, as I said, prospective founding members, and they gain in terms of additional shares in the final distribution of shares of the bank, and guaranteed representation on the board of directors. But any country can join anytime they want in the future. They don't have these gains, basically. Of course, if you are the first to join, and China needed at the beginning desperately gains in terms of credibility and reputation for this bank, obviously you can, in the negotiation, you can ask for some, I would call it payback measures as an incentive. And as I said before, if you are inside the negotiations, you can change or try to change the charter and the rules and procedures which are going to rule the bank. So that's the analysis that all the non-regional member countries did when they thought about joining this bank. how much things are changing. Just trying to explain the option taken by, thank you, Richard. Trying to explain the option taken by European governments joining this bank is not only about the SWOT analysis that I showed before, but also in the public opinion, things are changing a lot in Europe. This is the usual survey that in 48 countries, I think, the PU Research Center does. And you can see the first two columns show, ask the question if China is or will be a leading superpower in the world. And Europe is the region where the answers favor more China. That's quite interesting, even when we disaggregate per countries. But also, not talking about the future, but talking about today, this institute also asks people, public opinion, if they see China or the US as today as the world's leading economy. And Europe is the only region where they think that China is today the economic superpower in the world. So that could explain also the option taken by some European governments. And my last slide tries to foresee the future. So in terms of multilaterals, you have two extremes, I would say. You have on one side World Bank or Inter-American Development Bank, which they have strong safeguards in terms of climate, in climate change, in terms of gender, in terms of moving people from the place they live, and they have a strong procurement rules as well. On the other side, you have CAF, Corporación Andina de Fomento, which they have light safeguards, I would say, and no procurement rules at all. The procurement rules are given to the borrowing members. But it's not only that. IDEV, I worked there for 3 years, so usually they take on average 2 years since a project comes up to the offices to the point where the project is approved by the board of directors. Takes 2 years. So for some governments it's slow, too slow, and they prefer sometimes to have the money quicker in their pockets to start the project instead of, despite of being more expensive, I would say. CAF is not AAA. World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank are AAA, so World Bank is cheaper money, but slower money as well. And CAF is quicker money, a little bit more expensive, but the truth is that in Latin America right now, CAF is lending a lot more than World Bank. And there are some years they are even lending more than Inter-American Development Bank. So there was 1 year where CAF was the largest lender in Latin America region. So where would be AIIB seated or positioned itself in these two extremes? It's not easy to know. They claim that it's going to be faster than ADB and the World Bank, so it would be the CAF model, but they claim they will follow as well the best practices in terms of safeguards and procurement. So it would be a mixture of two models. It's not easy to conceal both, and that's why it's important for the big players, donors, multilateral donors in the world to join this bank to try to make sure that they make the right choice. And that was it, basically. The final thought is that China, this movement of creating this first non-European, non-US, one-country-led multilateral development bank is the ultimate try to become a global financial statecraft, matching the US on that. Thank you, Richard.